Okay, let's be honest, who doesn't love a good cartoon romance? It's kinda no secret that relationships and animation go together like peanut butter and jelly. People love the idea of characters that they love coming together and storylines being built from it. I mean, all it takes is one scroll down TikTok or Twitter to see the communities on top of communities of people dedicated to shipping certain characters together, no matter how messed up some of them are. My Hero fans. But nevertheless, people love the idea of ships, and even though most of the time this is just done by fans for fun and it's not actually canon, sometimes the fans get exactly what they want and the writers take two characters that everybody loves and put them together. And when this is done right, it can be a great thing for a show. It keeps the audience engaged, creates new storylines, and opens up the characters to new character development. But on the other hand, when this is done wrong, it can take an already good show and make it feel like it's dragging itself through the mud. And seeing as you probably already read the title of this video, you can guess what side of the coin we're talking about today. So grab a snack, sit down, and buckle up as we get ready to take a look at times that writers took shipping way too far. Regular show. What do I even say about Regular Show? If you've been on my channel before, you know that Regular Show is one of my favorite series of all time, even though I've had to slow down on the upload since Turner EST doesn't know what fair use is. But regardless, when I look back at Regular Show, there's not too much that I would actually change, seeing as I love many of the characters, the storylines, and the world itself. But even if you're the biggest Regular Show fan like me, there is one thing that is overwhelmingly agreed upon when it comes to this series, and that is the almost unanimous hatred for the Mordecai and Margaret storyline. Mordecai and Margaret were two characters introduced as early as season 1, with Mordecai being one half of the main duo, and Margaret being his reoccurring love interest throughout most of the show. It's a storyline that is pretty simple on paper, but in all honesty, this was one of the biggest dumpster fires in the entire show, maybe the only real dumpster fire in the entire show. It was a storyline that ran on way too long, was way too complicated, and by the end of it, the audience and even the characters in the show were looking around at themselves saying, man, life does not have to be this hard. Like I said in the beginning, Margaret was the love interest of Mordecai since the beginning of the show. But in the earlier episodes, their relationship was a one-sided one. Mordecai was head over heels for Margaret, but was too scared to actually ask her out, which led to many episodes where he would do dumb stuff to try to get her attention and make her think that he's cool. Who can forget the creation of Mordecai and the Rigby's? And the gag surrounding Margaret in the first couple seasons was that every time Mordecai would invite her to a social setting or he knew she was gonna be somewhere, it would always end with Margaret introducing Mordecai to her boyfriend of the week. Which in retrospect, now that I watched this back as a kid, this was insane. But after the creators ditched the whole boyfriend of the week gag, Margaret started showing clear signs that she was interested in Mordecai. And at the time, a young me was so excited, saying to myself, it's finally time for my boy Mordecai to get his moment. But oh boy was I wrong. Because as we would all go on to learn, Mordecai is a chronic overthinker. So every time he had a chance to ask Margaret out, get with Margaret, or make a move on her, he would always freak out and blow it. Or on the rare occasion he would actually make a move on Margaret and get some respect points from the audience, the respect points would immediately get deducted because he would freak out over the smallest mistakes. This man really spent an entire night going back in time and fighting his past self over a bad kiss. But somehow, someway, after getting trapped in the literal friend zone, Mordecai overcomes all the awkwardness and somehow manages to ask Margaret out. And honestly, if it was just smooth sailing after this probably would have been top 5 proudest Regular Show moments. But JG Quintel had other plans. Because if I'm being honest, for the time that they were actually together, Mordecai and Margaret were a really good couple. There was no fighting, there was no misunderstandings, they were both genuinely happy together. So it felt like all the trials and tribulations that the audience had to sit through and watch to get here, it felt like it all paid off. But I guess the writers just weren't happy with that. Because literally like 4 episodes later, Margaret dumps Mordecai because she's going to college halfway across state. What? To this day, I genuinely have no idea why they did this, especially when we know what happens later in the show. So after getting dumped, Mordecai goes into a hard depression and does some things that none of you should ever do if anyone ever breaks up with you. But the writing team said it's okay because we're gonna give him another love interest. So they reintroduced CJ, a cloud girl who was previously in a half-baked love triangle with Mordecai while he was still into Margaret. All jokes aside though, CJ was the GOAT, and the fact that she even had to interact with the scum that is Mordecai and Margaret is insane to me. She deserves so much better. But after fixing some issues between them, Mordecai and CJ officially get together. And I would actually argue that Mordecai and CJ were a better couple than Mordecai and Margaret, but you know, debate me in the comments. But after so much drama and unnecessary confusion for so many seasons, it finally felt like our boy Mordecai was finally in a healthy, happy relationship. So of course the writers had to bring back Margaret, and not just bring her back for a one-off, she's living back in the city now. Oh my goodness, you can't make this up. Which brings me to my least favorite part of this storyline, the love triangle. Because Margaret, who is still in love with Mordecai, and Mordecai, who is still in love with Margaret, keep getting into situations that end up making CJ, Mordecai's current girlfriend, explode with rage because she can tell that these two are still in love and are lying to her face about it. And this love triangle ultimately explodes with Mordecai hijacking Muscle Man's wedding and going on a 2-minute rant about how he hasn't found his true love. Mind you, his current girlfriend CJ is in the crowd listening to all of this. And like a normal girlfriend would react, she runs out crying. CJ, I swear this bum didn't deserve you. And the craziest thing is, you would think after all this, Mordecai and Margaret would end up together, but no. They both have epiphanies and realize that relationships are a lot of commitment and they both want to focus on themselves and figure out who they are. Which, I will not lie to you, is a valid reason to not date. But why did it take 7 seasons for them to come to this conclusion? You know, when it comes to shows that get a lot of flack online, The Legend of Korra is definitely up there. And amongst the Avatar community, this show is actually very controversial. Because on one hand, you have some Avatar fans that feel like this show is a mockery of the original Avatar: The Last Airbender show, and they absolutely hate The Legend of Korra. And then on the other hand, you have people who throughout the years have said, the show wasn't that bad. And look, was this show perfect? No. Were there things that I would change? Absolutely. Did I hate this show? Not really. It might shock you that I'm actually one of the 10 Korra fans in the world that didn't absolutely hate this show. But whether you loved or hated this show, there's one thing that everyone can agree on. Relationships took this show to a place that nobody wanted to go to. For 4 seasons, it was just love triangles on top of love triangles on top of love triangles. Are you starting to see the pattern here? And I guess the most frustrating thing about The Legend of Korra, besides how insufferable Korra was midway through season 1 all the way to midway through season 2, is the fact that if the writers really wanted to introduce relationship dynamics, it could have worked. When people talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender, a lot of people forget that some of the most iconic moments came from the whole will they won't they relationship plot lines. Aang and Katara, Zuko and that one Earth Nation girl. Hell, I haven't met a single person ever in history who hated Sokka and Suki. So relationships on paper isn't what hurt The Legend of Korra, it's the way the writers chose to go about it. To start, Korra spends a majority of season 1 trying to get with Mako even though he's with Asami, who, might I add, literally hit him with a car 3 episodes in, but hey man, I ain't judging. This leads to a weird dynamic where Korra, who's also on the same pro bending team as Mako, is trying to make moves on him, even though she knows he has a girlfriend and has interacted with his girlfriend, which is low-key insane in retrospect, like this was a kid's show. The whole concept that the Avatar, who's supposed to be the symbol of peace, is also a homewrecker is one of the funniest concepts I've ever thought about. And it's also kind of crazy how I never hear people bring up this aspect when they talk about the shipping disasters in this show. Eventually though, Korra does grasp the concept that Mako's in a relationship and backs off, so you know, good for her. And then Korra goes through a very short sad phase. And you're probably wondering, well, why was the sad phase so short? Because literally the same episode she goes on a date with Mako's younger brother Bolin, who has a thing for Korra. Oh my god, bro, you cannot make this up. And when Mako finds out that the girl that was literally just trying to get with him is now going on a date with his younger brother, understandably, he isn't that cool with it. Because like anyone would think from the outside looking in, it looks like Korra's just playing with Bolin's heart. So Mako, like a good big brother, goes to confront Korra basically to say, hey, don't be playing with my little brother's heart. And you would think that would be the end of that, right? Nope, they end up kissing the same episode in front of Bolin. They really gave my boy Bolin the CJ treatment. That's insane. But after that, the both of them apologize to Bolin. Korra goes on to do Avatar things, and Mako goes back to dating Asami. And everything's all fine and dandy. That is until Korra gets kidnapped by a terrorist. See, while everybody was trying their hardest to find Korra and get her back, Mako was going a little bit too over and beyond, which made Asami wonder, is there anything going on between those two? And Bolin, being the lovable idiot he is, accidentally lets it out that Mako and Korra kinda kissed while him and Asami were still together. So after Korra's found and Team Avatar saves the world, Mako and Asami break up. And then Mako and Korra get together, and that's The Legend of Korra, the end. Right? Wrong, because when season 2 rolls around, what happens? Mako and Korra break up. And I don't know if the writers were just bored and they were trying to think of new storylines for season 2, because I couldn't understand why they broke up at the beginning of season 2, especially since nothing that they were arguing about was actually that important. Like, there were so many times when I was watching season 2 and I was just staring at the screen bewildered because Korra was getting mad at Mako over literally nothing. It felt like the writers were just making up problems because Korra felt so out of character for how she was at the end of season 1. But after Mako and Korra break up, Korra goes missing again, and this time when she's found, she has a little bit of amnesia. So when Korra finally returns, she doesn't remember the fight or the breakup, so when she sees Mako, she runs and gives him a kiss in front of everybody, including Asami, who Mako started dating again while Korra was gone. I just don't understand how we got here. I don't understand why this was a thing. I don't understand why the writers pitched this and thought, yep, this is the direction the show needs to go in. And the funniest part about it all is Mako and Korra break up again, but then also Mako and Asami break up again. And that by itself isn't the crazy part. It was clear that the writers were using relationships to fill up episode time, and that none of this was actually gonna last. No, the crazy part was, after both breakups, the writers thought the best thing to do going forward would be to make Korra and Asami best friends. In what world do we live in do you become best friends with the person your partner cheated on you with not once, but twice? Like, I see so many people try to justify the way the writers wrote relationships in The Legend of Korra, and people try to say, well, this is a realistic take on toxic relationships. And then the writers pull something like this. But of course, this isn't the worst of it, because at the end of the series, Korra and Asami get together. And I just want to say, I hated this with every fiber in my being. And I don't want people thinking it's because of the whole same-sex thing, because I've seen people complain about that in particular in the past. I genuinely don't care about it. What bothered me is, on paper, Korra treated Asami horrible. She didn't respect her and Mako's relationship. She kissed Mako knowing that him and Asami were dating. She hid it and smiled in Asami's face while Asami was nothing but nice to her. And the writers genuinely got up here and said, you know what we should do? We should make them best friends turned lovers. Bro, I swear, I just hope the next Avatar show doesn't have any of this in here. You know, when it comes to not only modern day cartoons, but also modern day storytelling, Gravity Falls tells one of my favorite stories of all time. What this show was able to do in 2 seasons was truly amazing. And as someone who was really nerdy growing up and used to watch things like film theory, Gravity Falls was one of my favorite shows. And if I'm being 100% honest, it is nowhere near any of the other shows in this video when it comes to the dumpster fire of relationships. But there is something in Gravity Falls that falls under this umbrella that I think just doesn't really get talked about as much as it should. And this situation revolves around Dipper and Wendy. Wendy was introduced very early on in Gravity Falls as Dipper's love interest. And similar to early season Mordecai, it was a one-way streak. Seeing as Wendy was 3 years older than Dipper, this dynamic was always shown from the perspective of Dipper trying to impress Wendy. And this led to a lot of episodes revolving around Dipper doing complicated tasks to get Wendy's attention. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't really mind most of these episodes, mainly because they weren't unrealistic in the aspect of we've all been in that time and place where we had a crush on somebody but couldn't properly communicate it. Or maybe we did weird things that we would normally do to try to seem cooler in front of them. But the thing with Wendy and Dipper was, it got dragged on way longer than it should have. Because a lot of the episodes became really repetitive in the sense that they only took place from Dipper's perspective. It was always an episode where Dipper would freak out or overthink when it came to Wendy. And a lot of fans got tired of seeing this because by doing this, it really overshadowed Wendy as a character. Because from what we were able to see from Wendy, she was a character with a cool story to tell. She was the neighborhood cool girl, her dad was a giant buff lumberjack, her and her friends were always getting into trouble, she liked to live on the wild side. There were so many different ways her character could have went, but a lot of it was never explored because almost every single time she was in an episode, it mainly revolved around Dipper having a crush on her. There are 40 episodes in Gravity Falls. Out of 40, 9 of them revolved around Dipper having a crush on Wendy. Only 6 of them had Wendy involved in the main plot, and in the rest of the episodes, Wendy was either not there or just an afterthought. We never got an episode centered around Wendy like we did for Seuss. If it wasn't the main plot or story revolving around Dipper, then Wendy wasn't really used. Even in season 2, when the Dipper and Wendy plot ended, Wendy's character never really elevated.
An important moment.
Well, because it was super important to us, because it's like, you know, we've all seen, and this things have gotten better since we were making this, but we've all seen stories about like love interests that are just there to be a love interest and they're not a character.
Right.
And we were like just fighting as hard as we could to make Wendy like a real viable character that could have stories on her own and stuff. And it was like moments like that where she's like, she stood up for Dipper when she didn't have to.
Where you start to get to know her. But I will say that we always wanted to do a full Wendy episode, and we never cracked one because I feel like part of it was this character that we've created here is so chill and likable that when you put her in a situation where you have to make her commit the sin where she has to learn 21 minutes of story, it was like, oh, it doesn't feel like that awesome Wendy we know. And I know there's a way we could have done it, but we never quite.
There were like 5 dead
solved
episodes.
it.
It was tough.
Yeah, we tried many times and could never quite land it.
I mean,
we wanted to honor her so much that we couldn't figure out the right episode with her because we didn't want to mess her up.
Yeah.
Right.
And look, like I said, I love Gravity Falls. But it just kind of sucks to think about the fact that we had a character as cool as Wendy that could have had standalone episodes to really flesh out her character, but instead a lot of it was scrapped for this Dipper Crush relationship arc. You know, one of the weirdest things in the world to me is seeing how the perception of total drama has shifted over the years, especially on the internet. Growing up, this show was literally the closest thing to a reality TV show for a kid. I remember when it first came out, me and all my friends were hooked on it and we couldn't wait for the weekly episode to come out. And don't get me wrong, was it corny at times? Yeah. Was it stereotypically catering to teenagers? Of course. But that didn't mean I enjoyed it any less. The show was literally Fear Factor if it met 16. Y'all remember that show, 16? I think it was made by the same people who made Total Drama. But like I said, it's kind of crazy to see how the perception of Total Drama has changed over the years. Because if you ask people about Total Drama when the show was first airing, most people would probably describe it as that show that was kind of edgy about teenagers competing on an island. But now if you talk about Total Drama, most people think of it as the show that has more ships than a porting dock. When I tell you after season 1, the writers took the drama and Total Drama and pushed it to the 10th power. This went from being a show about teenagers trying to win a cash prize with a little bit of relationships on the side, to being a show about teenagers trying to win a cash prize with a lot of relationships on the side, even when the writers had to force it, and I do mean they were forcing it at times. And that will never be more apparent than the atrocity that was Duncan and Gwen. Duncan and Gwen were both characters introduced in the very first episode of Total Drama. But funny enough, they weren't even characters that were interested in one another. Originally, Gwen and Trent were the two characters shown since the very first episode to be heading in that direction. Meanwhile, Duncan, on the other hand, surprisingly halfway through the season got with Courtney. And I can honestly say in that first season of Total Drama, the writers were really able to write some nice moments with those couples. And to this day, they're probably two of the most popular in the series. But let's just say the writers had a change of heart when season 2 rolled around. Because from the moment Total Drama Action aired, it was clear that the writers said that they were done with those season 1 relationships and they wanted Duncan and Gwen together. To start things off, they did a complete character assassination on Trent. Trent in season 1 was a laid back, everyman type of guy. He wasn't really that animated, he was just a chill dude who played the guitar. And when he got with Gwen, it was pretty natural and normal. Even when they were having relationship problems, things were pretty normal. But once season 2 started, Trent became a borderline obsessed psychopath. Him and Gwen end up being on 2 different teams, and Duncan ends up being picked by Gwen to be on her team. This, plus a couple other interactions between Gwen and Duncan, causes Trent to basically lose his mind. He starts doing everything in his power to try to appeal to Gwen because he thinks she's cheating on him with Duncan, even though at that part in the show they're literally just teammates. Trent starts throwing challenges so that Gwen's team can win. And probably the weirdest thing of all, the writers did this thing where they made Trent obsessed with the number 9, because if you take Gwen's name and Trent's name and put it together, it's 9 letters. So if Trent didn't have 9 eggs on his plate or 9 beads on his bracelet, he would start freaking out and start slapping himself on the forehead, which is just a complete 180 from his character in season 1. But eventually, after Gwen finds out that Trent's been throwing challenges so that her team can win, she breaks up with him and he gets booted off the show. Now, Courtney and Duncan were a little different because their characters didn't change drastically going into season 2. Courtney was the uptight preppy girl who thought she was nice but was honestly unbearable for a majority of season 1. Then we had Duncan, the juvenile delinquent that acted like a tough guy but was really a softie on the inside. They were built up slowly throughout the first half of season 1, and when they got together it was actually pretty well written. But like Trent and Gwen, the problem started in season 2. Because like I said before, Duncan and Gwen were on the same team, So even though at the time when Trent was freaking out, Duncan and Gwen weren't actually together, the writers put Duncan in a position where he was basically Gwen's right-hand person. So even though that season they were giving Trent the boot, they were basically setting up Duncan and Gwen, even though Courtney was still pretty involved in the picture. And the writers had Courtney leading the charge, pushing the allegations that Gwen was trying to get her man. So when Total Drama World Tour came around, yep, you guessed it, the season of the love triangle. Gwen and Duncan kiss, Courtney finds out about it, she tries to destroy the both of them. There was a whole lot going on this season. And probably the worst part about it is, almost everybody agrees that Total Drama World Tour is the best season of Total Drama outside of maybe the people who think the first season is the best. But when people talk about this season, they always say it's the best season up until the love triangle. And that's mainly because nobody asked for this. This was the most forced drama that I've ever seen. In the process of trying to do a love triangle, they completely ruined one character, and then they dragged out a situation that didn't need to be dragged out. If they wanted Duncan and Gwen together, they could have just did that. There were multiple times where Duncan and Courtney broke up and then got right back together. They could have just cut that out and put Gwen and Duncan together, and the funny thing is, Gwen and Duncan weren't even a bad couple. There are a lot of Total Drama fans that genuinely like that couple more than the first two. But it was all the things surrounding Gwen and Duncan that made it feel stupid and made all the characters involved look bad. And I refuse to talk about anything after World Tour because it just kept getting worse. And look man, there is nothing wrong with adding a little bit of romance to your story. But when it comes at the price of characters, the plot, or just the sanity of your audience, you should probably just stop. But if you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate you checking out another one. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload my next video. Also, check out my socials in the description if you want to keep up with me, what I be talking about on a daily, because, you know, I talk about cartoons all day. And basically anything art and animation. But until then, it's been your boy CornXV, and I'm off this.
Up in this tank, yeah, it's on. Turn on bus mass up like coke. Pull up in Rovers, it's on. Bitch, I'm cheese Sosa, this coke. Llama, it can't want no hoes. Bottle, it can't let me pour. High as fun, just like a float. Wanna glow up, let me show you. V long thugs.